It's another season of the Buzz Westfall Book Club at the St. Louis County Library. Tonight, tonight I'll be over there. Michael Hainey, New York Times bestselling author, is going to be in town for a book signing and a book reading tonight, 7 p.m. at the St. Louis County Library over in Plaza Frontenac, and he joins us now via Skype. Michael Hainey, welcome to Big 550 KTRS.
Thanks for having me on Big 550. Nice to be here.
Your New York Times best-selling book is now out in paperback. It's called After Visiting Friends, and it's a story you tell. It's a story you research about your father who died when you were a little boy. Is that right?
That's right. He died in 1970 when I was 6 years old. He was a newspaper man up the road in Chicago.
And so take me through. You became a writer. You're a writer at GQ, and
right.
it sounds like this story about your father's passing was gnawing at you all these years.
Yeah, well, this is, it's a very personal story, but it's what I always say. We all have family, and every family has its secrets and its mysteries. But I think this is a very universal story. It gets into those themes. My father died. He was 35, and I realized when I was a young boy that the story our family was told about the circumstances didn't really add up. So it wasn't until I was well into my 30s that I kind of worked up the courage to go in search of that truth. But I think, that truth that we all look for in our family.
It's one in which your dad was a newspaper man in Chicago. He wasn't necessarily famous, though, was he?
No, but he was sort of a young rising star, and he sort of died. When he died, he was on the up, and but so it was really, a son going in his father's footsteps and going in search of that truth. He was from a small town in Nebraska, so I spent 10 years working on this book and looking for the answers to what happened to him the night he died.
And this, what I love about memoirs like this, After Visiting Friends, is because it's not a memoir of George Washington. It's not a memoir of somebody famous,
Right.
Dick Cheney. This is an everyday working class guy with a family whose son, 30 years later tries to figure out what happened. It's sort of a great whodunit, but it's also a great personal journey as well.
Well, I think you hit it right on the head there. I think that's why the book connects with so many people. When I go out on these speaking tours, and I'm really excited to come to St. Louis because I see the sort of space this book creates for people to have conversations. As I said, we all have family. Every family has its questions and its mysteries and its secrets. And I'm just sort of one guy who went in search of that. And I think the book really inspires folks when they come together, these readings, to sort of share their own stories of family secrets and wonder how I did it. And I just want to inspire folks to take their own journeys.
The book is called After Visiting Friends, a son story. Michael Hainey tonight will be in St. Louis for a book signing and a book reading. Plaza Frontenac, 7 o'clock, and I'll be hosting the event. The title, After Visiting Friends, what does that mean?
Well, it was sort of the beginning of the clue of it, to me. There was an obituary I found on my father, and it said he died after visiting friends, and he gave the address of this building in Chicago, and I realized I've never heard of any friends there, I never met any friends, and didn't even, so it was, this 10-year journey to find the friends who knew him and to get them to tell me their stories of what happened to him.
You also set up a Chicago late 60s, which is a time that is long since gone.
Right. Well, that era, my father was that newspaper era, and was sort of, he was kind of that Don Draper Mad Men era of, guys he worked what was called the lobster shift. He worked from 6 p.m. until 2 in the morning, putting out the morning edition of the paper. So after these guys got off of work at 2 in the morning, that's their 5 o'clock, and they went out into the night and sort of lived this whole other world. But it was very hard drinking, hard living, and this is for a guy who came from small town Nebraska, the Midwest, where we all come from, St. Louis and Chicago, and a lot of these guys had come from these small towns, and here they were in Chicago, sort of creating these new lives for themselves.
How hard was it to recreate that sort of world in which we only know from the movies, more or less, right? Because you had to sort of go back to that world.
Sure. Well, I spent a lot of time listening to a lot of stories from a lot of his old friends, and I think, that's really one of another real joys of the book, I think, is transporting folks back to a time that they long to go to. And I think that's why we love, whether it's Downton Abbey or Mad Men or after visiting friends my book is because you get to go into a time and a place where it's very vibrant and alive, and I worked hard to recreate that time.
Michael Hainey, how many people knocked on their door some 30 years later and said, "Hi, can you tell me how my dad died?" You must have gotten a couple of doors slammed into your face.
More than a few, yeah. But I think, that's what I think inspires folks who read the book is that, the journey is a long journey. And sometimes folks say no to you. Sometimes they say yes, but you have to start knocking on doors. And I think when you go in search of the truth, you'll always find someone and some people who will help you. And I think that's another reason why the book inspires a lot of folks.
Ultimately, the question is why? Why did you have to do this? Why did you take 10 years? What did you want answered?
Why did I not let sleeping dogs lie?
Yeah.
Some folks, because I think as a son, I needed to know what happened to him, and I needed to know my father, and to understand. I felt if I knew where he came from and what happened to him, then I could know myself better. So, I worked hard to sort of find that truth. And really, one of the most powerful moments was when I had to explain to my mother and my brother what had happened to my father. And, that was something that could have broken apart a family, but for us, really brought us closer together. And again, sort of telling my story, I think, inspires a lot of folks when they see the journeys they want to take in their own families.
Did your mother discourage you, or did she encourage you in this journey?
She encouraged me. She didn't really sort of read the book until I was about to finish it. And when I had finished it, even before I published it, I gave her the book to read. And she read it and would just call me the next day in tears. And I said, "Well, why are you crying?" And she said, "Because this is such a powerful, beautiful story, and I'm glad you wrote it. And I think maybe our story can inspire other families."
Yeah.
So,
Your brother have a similar viewpoint as your mother?
yeah, very similar. He was very supportive all along. And I think, again, I just think to inspire folks and think you're never alone in these journeys you want to take. And oftentimes the truth we seek is the truth that other folks know, that they have a suspicion they want it as well, but you got to be strong and sort of lead the way.
I don't want to give away the end of the book. I don't want to take away the joy of reading it. So I'm not. I don't think either of us want to give it away. But
Right.
it's taking this journey, and as a journalist yourself and a writer for GQ, it's always fascinating to me that so many times journalists who start this journey, whether it's their own family or some crazy story they heard that they sort of trace back the roots 30, 40 years, there's always somebody alive. There's always some newspaper account. They always usually find the answer they're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, you do, and but it's never complete. But I think that's, the reason I think the book inspires folks is I say this was 40 years later, and it was many times I thought I'm never going to find the answer. Everyone's dead, no one's going to remember, and yet, as I say, it's never too late to get on living. It's never too late to sort of take your journey, and I think that then that's really why the book connects with people and inspires them. They see, you're never going to believe the people that are out there, strangers who you don't even know are out there who are going to help you.
It's a New York Times best-selling book, now out in paperback. The book is called After Visiting Friends. It's a son story. Michael Hainey, GQ writer, is going to be in St. Louis tonight, 7 p.m. for a book signing and a book reading at St. Louis County Library. Michael, did you start it off as a book, or did you just start it off as some answer you wanted for yourself?
I started it off as an answer I wanted to find for myself, and I had a good friend who encouraged me. He said, "I think there's a book here," and I thought, well, I'm gonna start writing, and that writing took me 10 years, and I'm so glad I did it. And I'm really looking forward to getting out there and talking to folks in St. Louis about it.
Sure, but it's also at some point you have to have an ending to a story. I mean, if it, if it's just if he died, after having a heart attack after visiting friends, how much of a story can you make out of that?
I didn't know. And then, again, I guess I thought I'm going to write this story at least for myself and see where it takes me. I, as I say, worked 10 years on it, and I didn't know where it was going to end. You're exactly right. But I think, again, you never know where it's going to go unless you take those first few steps.
Doing some research for the book, Michael Hainey, I read an article, and I forget where I read it, but it talks about the camaraderie and the connectiveness of the newspaper men in the 60s. And so,
Right.
you had to break through their code of silence, if you will,
Sure,
to get to the
sure.
answer. Talk about that for a moment.
Well, I think it's that's an eternal thing, the code of silence. If you think about yourself, think about if today someone knocked on your door, any of us out there, and said, "Listen, I think you knew my mother and my father 20, 30 years ago. Can you tell me X story?" And in that moment, I think, again, this is why the book really resonates with folks, is there are a lot of moments in here where you, the reader, see yourself, and you have to do what I call that moral calculation. And if someone knocked on your door today and said, "Can you tell me a story?" You have to think, well, everyone says we want the truth, but we all know what happens to people who tell the truth. And so there are a number of guys who, look, I understand they didn't want the responsibility of telling me, or maybe some news that I might not want to hear, but there were a couple guys, Tom Moffat outside of Milwaukee, who eventually told me the story. And yeah, I worked very hard in the book that anyone who stonewalled me, as they say, or didn't like, I think everyone was doing what they thought best.
Yeah.
But it was a hard thing to sort of earn that trust to get there.
Well, what about you? How much did you say to yourself, do I really want to hear the true story? And you had to have some of those personal moments where you yourself thought, you know what, I don't think I want to hear this story.
Sure, and I didn't know what I was going to find, and yet I thought, listen, not knowing, it's that thing again where I think we all know this feeling when we don't know. What do? We fill in the landscape in our mind with all these what ifs, and we so sometimes what we conjure is way beyond what something could be. So I thought, wherever this thing takes me, whatever truth I find out, at least I'll know. And I think that's that sense of completeness that everyone longs for when they don't know the answer.
The book is called After Visiting Friends. Michael Hainey's a GQ writer. He's written a New York Times best-selling book, now out in paperback. And he's going to be at St. Louis County Library tonight for a book signing and a book reading. Michael Hainey, any movie interest in the book?
There's some out there, but I'm, as they say, not at liberty to say. But people love the story, and everyone says this will make a great movie. So, fingers crossed. We'll meet some folks out there in St. Louis tonight, and maybe do some casting.
There you go. All right. New York Times bestselling book, After Visiting Friends. Michael Hainey tonight. St. Louis County Library for a book signing and a book reading. I'll be hosting the event. Michael, safe trip in, and we'll see you tonight.
Thank you.
You got it.
Thank you.
We are back in a moment here. Big 550 KTRS.